Oh, not too bad. Half hour behind, eh?
Yeah.
Was it 1:30?
We'll try to catch up.
Yeah, it's only a half hour. That's not bad. All right. Everybody have enough to eat? Yes. All good? All good? Wonderful. Awesome. All right. So we're going to be hitting in our last session. I'm sure afterwards, if you want to hang around, still buy something or whatever and talk, I'm sure Rich will give you the time that you need. So I've enjoyed Who Learned Something already thus far. I really enjoyed that last session tremendously. Like, that was really neat. I enjoyed that. So I've been learning through this whole thing. So awesome. Without further ado, again, sign up, so on and so on. I know it's gone through. If you change your mind or whatever, they're up front here, the clipboards and such. Otherwise, we'll give the rest of the afternoon to you, sir.
Okay. All right. So that was a lovely lunch. This session, every speaker knows this. This is the most difficult session because you've had your high GI roll and you've had other carbs and stuff, and now you'll crash in about half an hour, and so we'll have a bunch of bobbing heads here. In any case, this will be a shorter session, and then we'll get right into Q&A after that. And we're going to start with a question I didn't have time to answer on radiometric dating. We're going to get to that because that was asked earlier this morning, and I was too busy to give it a full attention. So we'll start with that, and then any other questions that we have, we'll wind down the clock with question time. So here's a picture of our staff. This is a fairly recent picture. We've hired another event planner since that time. We've got 19 people there in the Canadian office in Kitchener, 7 speakers, and I'm the CEO. I don't know if that was mentioned already. I'm the CEO of the Canadian office. Started as a room in my home in late '98. And I've been speaking on this, actually, this coming November, it'll be 30 years. My first creation presentation was in November of 1994, using a slide projector. Remember those? And a red laser pointer. When red laser pointers were the newest thing. And it was for my college and career. All my buddies that I grew up with in the church, we had a college and career group, and I just heard a speaker speak on creation evolution, and then I put my own talk together a few months later, and did it with the college and career group at my church, and the guys were amazed at it. They said, "What's that?" "It's a laser." And they said, "What do you mean, like on Star Wars?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got it in my hand. Isn't that cool?" And it's anyways, I've mentioned our website already. Again, we're an information ministry. We want to get faith-building information out into the church. Hopefully some of the stuff we're moving very quickly through some of these subjects here today, but there's so much great information that supports, that matches, that fits with the Bible. We read our Bibles, and even for those of you who you don't like or you're not into science, not all of you are, I'm guessing, not all of you are into science. Maybe science isn't your thing. That doesn't matter. You, armed with God's Word, taking a stand on God's Word, if some very credentialed PhD scientist comes along that's published dozens of papers in peer-reviewed journals, comes along and says, "Well, no, these fossils here, they were buried slowly over millions of years," you can say, "Well, no, I think they probably have something to do with a global flood that wasn't millions of years ago." You're right, and he's not. You don't even need to be into science. If you start your thinking with the Bible, it'll point you in the right direction. The Bible says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. For those of us who believe that there is a God, there's great advantage to that, even if you're not into science. But in this session here, we're going to talk about, I've mentioned all this already. Let's just skip ahead a few slides here. Let's go to there. All right, biology. This session is going to be on biology. And when most of the time when you say evolution, people think of biological evolution. There's different kinds of evolution. There's stellar evolution. There's different kinds of evolution. There's abiogenesis, that's life from non-life. But biology is what people think about. Natural selection, genetics, that kind of thing. So that's what we'll focus on in this session here, and then we'll go into questions right after that. But just for a bit of review, there is this notion in creation evolution, that the creation evolution issue, the origins debate, is all about facts, right? There's facts for evolution and there's facts for creation, and the idea is that if we get more facts for creation than there are facts for evolution, well, then we're winning, right? Well, actually, there's only one set of facts, and the facts, the observations, the things that are seen out there are interpreted to fit with creation or fit with evolution. But there's only, for example, we have one Earth, right? There's one Earth, and it's interpreted to either have evolved have changed over millions of years, or it was created by God. But there's one set of facts, the Earth and everything in it, and it's interpreted to be different things. There's one set of fossils. Here's some big fossils, dinosaur fossils. Here's some dinosaur fossils in the basement of a museum, many of them still in the plaster casts that they used to transport them from the field. There's one set of fossils. We study the same animals between creationists and evolutionists. Well, sort of. And here's a killer bunny rabbit. And I have no idea what that is. And these are not meerkats, they're meerkats, if you get the connection. But never mind. We all have the same data. You can see it here in the middle. We have the same dinosaurs and the same fossils and the same animals and the same plants and the same people groups, but we come to different interpretations of those things, not because the observations or the facts are any different, but because we have different starting assumptions. And I again, this, in way of review, we talked about this a little bit in the first session. You either believe that God's word is truth, that God is the creator, and we glean truth from Scripture, or you believe that man decides truth. Millions of years ago, this happened and that happened when nobody was around to observe anything, and there's no written record of it. We have a written record of history recorded by somebody who is an eyewitness who was there, who records things accurately and doesn't lie. The evolutionists don't have that, so we have a tremendous advantage in this area. Now, starting our thinking from the Bible, can you think of a Bible verse that talks about how we can see the evidence for a designer in the creation? Heavens declare the glory of God, Psalm 19:1, yes. Yeah, there's a number that we can point to. I'm thinking of one in particular. In Romans 1:20, it says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of those," talking about God, the invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood where? By the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. What this verse is saying is that the evidence that there is a designer, creator God is so plain, you can look around at the creation and you can see that it's designed. It's so plain that people, when one day when they stand before God in judgment, where do you go, this way or that way? They're not going to have an excuse. The evidence is so plain that everybody knows that there's a God. That's what this verse is saying. And it seems to be all-inclusive, doesn't it? It doesn't say, for example, well, if you're an atheist, then Romans 1:20 doesn't apply to you, right? It seems to be all-inclusive. Do you know any atheists? Do you know any atheists? Name some atheists. Richard Dawkins. Okay, I can always count on. He's probably the world's most famous atheist. There are others that are in the headlines now and then as well, but Dawkins is he's not just an atheist. He's an evolutionist. He's a big promoter of evolution, promotes evolution all the time, and he's not just an atheist and an evolutionist, he's an anti-creationist. He specifically attacks people who believe in biblical creation, attacks the Bible, and so on. In one of his anti-creation books that he wrote long ago, he said this: "We have seen that living things are too improbable and too beautifully designed to have come into existence by chance." Pardon? What? That sounds like something a creationist, a Bible believer would say, right? Yes, living things are too improbable and too beautifully designed to have come into existence by chance. What are you talking about, Mr. Dawkins? Now, he's got designed in quotes here. What he's saying is he's looking at living things and the design in living things, And he's saying, he's basically admitting Romans 1:20. He's saying, yes, I can see that there's a design in living things. And then he goes on in the rest of his little book here, The Blind Watchmaker, written many years ago now, to try to explain the appearance of design without a designer. Okay. Has Dawkins found a loophole in Romans 1:20? Can things appear to be designed and yet not have a designer? That's the thesis of his book here. Let's try and break down what he's talking about here. He's talking about DNA, for example. That's one of the things he's talking about anyway. Here it is represented kind of in cartoony format. DNA, imagine a long rope that's twisted up. And as you read along the rope, it's an instruction code. The letters are spelled chemically. There's 4 letters in the DNA alphabet, not 26 like in the English alphabet. As you read along, there are sentences that spell words to produce amino acids that make proteins that make up the different structures of our body. And it's much more complicated than just making amino acids. But what he's saying is, you can get the instructions, the blueprints on DNA, the blueprints that run living things, without a designer. And so we're talking here about the origin of life. And the idea is that, actually it was an old idea, if you get the right chemicals, the idea was, and you probably heard this, we're sending probes to Mars to look for water and to look for other elements. And if there's water on Mars, maybe life could evolve on Mars, and there's the idea is, if you have the right chemicals, or if we had the right chemicals on the ancient Earth long ago, as long as you have the right chemicals, life will evolve. Now that, as I said, that's an old idea. Chemistry is not the biggest problem for the origin of life. And all scientists recognize that now. Here's a non-Christian scientist. He says this: we now know that the secret of life lies not with the chemical ingredients as such, but with the logical structure and organizational arrangement of the molecules. Like a supercomputer, life is an information processing system. It is the software of the living cell that is the real mystery, not the hardware. So it's the DNA. How do you get DNA? Life runs on the information stored in DNA, written on the DNA molecule, not the chemicals. That's an old idea. Life is based on information. And so if life runs on information, if it's based on information, the question that everybody needs to ask, including Christians and non-Christians, is, what generates the information needed for life? Where did that information come from? Now, obviously, we have an answer. It came from God. But what about the non-believer? We're talking about information here. Let's turn to information experts and what they know about information. One such information expert, his name's Dr. Werner Gitt. He's a German scientist, wrote this book called In the Beginning Was Information. Now, he's a Bible-believing scientist. And in his book, the basic premise is that information always comes from intelligence. Every time you see information, a code, a language, whatever, it always comes from intelligence. He says, a code system, you could think here of the genetic code, that's a code system, is always the result of a mental process. It requires an intelligent origin or inventor. It should be emphasized that matter as such is unable to generate any code. All experiences indicate that a thinking being voluntarily exercising his own free will, cognition, and creativity is required. He goes on to say, there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. And the secular scientists, the non-believing scientists, they say basically the same thing. Here's back to Dr. Paul Davies here. There is no known law of physics able to create information from nothing. This is a dead end for evolution. If life is based on information, and we now know that it is, it's not just about the chemicals. If it's based on information, and information always comes from intelligence, then the only thing that makes sense for explaining all the life on Earth is in the beginning God. You can't have in the beginning random processes. It doesn't generate information. It's a massive problem for evolution. It's probably the biggest biological problem, the biggest problem for biological evolution. How do you get the information? And it's not just about the chemicals. And then it's not just about getting the information to build a single cell. Let's think of the complexities here. Here's our single cell. Let's imagine that's the first cell that gave rise to all the life on Earth, including you and me and groundhogs. I saw a groundhog here this morning running by the church, and every other life form on Earth. Now, if we think of this as far as information, that cell would have had the information to build itself, represented here by these books. Cells are very complex. There's tens of thousands of components inside the cell, very, very complex. Even just the cell membrane is complex. There's little holes that open and close that let in good chemicals and let out bad chemicals. How does it work? We don't know. There's entire university departments dedicated to studying these things. But the evolutionary story says that the single cell, over millions of years, went on to evolve into a multicellular creature, something like this, perhaps, over millions of years. Which means, if we think about it in terms of information, over those hypothetical millions of years of evolution, we have to add new, never-before-existing genetic instructions that the single cell didn't have. The single cell didn't have the genetic instructions to build things like hands and fingers and fingernails and arms and heart and a brain and muscles and tissue and feet and knees. It didn't have it. So information has to be some sort of, or evolution has to be some sort of information gaining process. That's what evolution has to do. It has to be that in order to get the story of life from a single cell to all the life we see today. And that is just not what scientists find. And in case you think I'm making a bigger deal about this than we ought to, there was a film crew that went to the home of Professor Dawkins. And in case the audio doesn't come through here, the interviewer asks Dawkins, can you give an example of an evolutionary process or a mutation which has been seen to add information to the genome, to the DNA? And you can listen to Dawkins' answer here.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
Did you get that? No answer. And what happened here, he asks for the camera to be shut off, and when the camera comes back on, he answers a completely different question. It's just a dodge. And I don't show you this, by the way, to try to poke fun at Professor Dawkins. He's highly intelligent. He is a brilliant scientist, and he's an amazing writer. He's a very good writer. Just his paragraph structure and stuff, it's just a brilliant writer. But I show you this to show you the bankruptcy of that particular belief system. He believes evolution with all his heart. There are millions of men and women all around the world who believe in evolution with all their hearts. But it's a bankrupt belief system. If evolution is true, Dawkins should have been able to point to thousands of examples where information has increased. It should be happening all the time. He should say, yes, we've seen it, we've studied this animal out in the field and in the lab, we've seen it in this bacteria and this critter here and here and here and here. It should be all over the place. But Dawkins is smart enough to know that there isn't a single example. And every time a question like that is posed, can you give an example of where information has increased in genetic instructions? That's going to be the answer. Why? Because we know that information doesn't come from a random process. It comes from God, it comes from someone who's intelligent. And look, we don't need scientists to talk to us about this. We all know this from experience. If you walk along a beach in the summertime and you see Johnny Loves Susie written there in the sand, you know that that's not the result of the action of the waves on the beach, right? Somebody who's intelligent wrote that. When you see information, you know it's from intelligence. You see graffiti on the side of a building. You can't even read it. It's some gang symbol or whatever. But there's intelligence in that. You know that that's not just the result of an explosion of a bunch of spray paint bottles, right? There's intelligence behind that information. We recognize the structures in the sand that the waves will make and a message that denotes intelligence, right? Somebody wrote that message. Maybe somebody who's hopeful and intelligent wrote that message, right? Johnny Loves Susie, written there in the sand or something like that. At this point, it's game over for evolution, for biological evolution. You can't generate information. Life is based on information. The end. The only people that have answers is Christians who believe the Bible. In the beginning, God, who's very intelligent, programmed and engineered living things. But let's move on. We got a little time left here. Let's keep going. It gets even worse for the evolutionists. Let's talk about natural selection. And some of you might be thinking, okay, well, natural selection, well, that's evolution, isn't it? Actually, natural selection happens. It's a fact. Creationists wrote about it long before Darwin, decades before Darwin. It's pretty clear nowadays that Darwin plagiarized from creationists when he wrote his book. And it's an important part of the creation model today. We write more papers on it today than we ever have. And it has nothing to do with evolution. Now, let me explain that last one there. That one might be a bit of a puzzler. What, it has nothing to do with evolution? Because we've all very likely learned in school, and our kids might be learning this, that for example, the textbooks and teachers, they say, well, hey, students, look at these little changes in living things. We can breed different types of dogs or roses or tulips or pigs or something. We'll just give it millions of years. And one kind could evolve into another. Is that what's going on there? Let's think of a group of living things that has a lot of variety. Dogs. We're kind of familiar with dogs. There's a great variety within the dog kind. There's all kinds of wild dogs, foxes, jackals, dingoes down in Australia, wolves, coyotes, all kinds of different wild dogs. And then in addition to all the wild dogs, there's over 650 varieties of domestic dogs, the dogs that we have in our homes. Poodle, Chihuahua, Great Dane, German Shepherd, all kinds of different things. So let's relate this. Is this evolution going on? Let's understand this in a biblical framework. Let's go back to the time of the flood. And again, here's a picture of the ark. There's Mr. and Mrs. Noah over on the right-hand side there. I'm not sure they had trucks back then. But no, that's just there for scale. Now, how many dogs would have got off the ark after the flood? 2. Unless they were busy during the time of and there may have been, but anyway, 2 got on the ark. Let's say 2 dogs get off the ark, and from those dogs, we get all the varieties of the dogs that we see in the dog kind today. How does that work? Again, the question is that evolution? What's going on there to get this variety in the dog kind? So let's imagine those dogs get off the ark, they get married and have kids, and they get married and have kids, and they get married and have kids. This is church. I need to dress it up a little bit, but you know what's going on here. And after a while, you get lots of dogs. And every one of those dogs is a little bit different than their parents, right? And you know, we could do the same thing with people. We don't look exactly like our brothers and sisters, and our brothers and sisters don't look exactly like their parents. You know, and some people might say, oh, thank God. But a lot of teenagers think that anyway. Great, I look different than my parents. But why do you look different than your parents? Isn't that the more interesting question? We came from our parents. How did those differences come out? Let's go back to the dogs here. Let's imagine at the time of Babel, people start moving away from Babel. Babel was in the Middle East, a warmer climate. Let's say they take some dogs with them, or these dogs migrate on their own to different areas of the world. Let's go with the group that moves northward into Europe and into England, a colder climate than Babel. And let's say they take with them a medium fur length set of dogs. It has the information for long fur here, L, and the information for short fur, S. And it could combine in their offspring like this. In this first example, it got the information for short fur from both mom and dad. It didn't get any information for long fur, so it ends up having short fur. And you can get those other varieties as well from the parents. You can see that, right? This is basic stuff here. Now, in that colder climate, north of Babel, harsher winters, that kind of thing, which of those puppies, which of those offspring do you think might be healthier over the long run, might leave more offspring? Probably the dogs with the long fur, right? So after a while, after a number of generations, in that colder climate with harsher winters, the dogs with the genetic information to produce short fur are gradually lost from that population, and all you're left with are dogs with long fur. Those dogs have now become adapted to their environment through natural selection. That's natural selection. I mean, it gets more complicated than this, you understand, but this is the basics here. If you've taken biology, you say, well, there's a lot more to it. Yes, I know that, but this is enough to get the basics across. those dogs are better adapted to their environment than their grandparents were. That's adaptation. That's natural selection. But that's not evolution. Why is that not evolution? They're not gaining more information. Evolution requires the gaining of massive amounts of information to get all these bigger and better things. In fact, what's happened here? They've lost information. You can breed these dogs down here for hundreds and thousands of years. You'll never get a short fur variety of dog. If you want a short fur variety of dog, you got to travel somewhere else in the world and find a dog with short fur, and then you can breed that back in. But and if some of you aren't into science or whatever, let's think of a different analogy for natural selection. Think of natural selection like a salad bar. We kind of had, or a soup bar like we had here for lunch. If you're really hungry, you can go up to the salad bar hundreds of times, and you can get a different variety of salad every time. You go up the first time, you have 90% Caesar salad, and 10% potato salad, and 1 bean. And the next time you go up, and you can have a different variety. You can have many different varieties of salad if the salad bar is really, really big. But if the salad bar doesn't have any pizza, you're never going to get pizza. It's sad, I know, but that's what natural selection is like. It's aptly named. It can only select from what's already there. Natural selection works really, really well if in the beginning God put lots of genetic instructions, a really big salad bar, in every group of living things, the dog kind, the cat kind, the elephant kind, the giraffe kind, the people kind, and so on. We can explain as Christians the differences in people, and we can breed different kinds of dogs or roses or tulips, and we can explain different kinds of horses or palm trees or whatever. It's not evolution. It's just good engineering by God. God actually engineered living things to adapt to different climates without going extinct at the slightest climate change. That's actually what natural selection does. That's one of the benefits of natural selection. If there's a drought somewhere, a lot of organisms might die, but some of them are capable of surviving on less water, less liquid, and then the others die out, yes, but as a result of the drought, those drought-resistant, if they're crops or plant, whatever it might be, they go on to repopulate, and now you have a whole population of whatever it might be, say plants. You have a crop that's now drought-resistant. It's natural selection. God engineered living things to be able to adapt to changing climates without going extinct at the slightest climate change. It's good engineering. Evolution is often drawn like this, like the tree figure. You've probably seen some or remember something like this. All life on Earth began from a single cell, and it diversified from that point. If creation is pictured kind of in the same way, it's often pictured as a lawn or as grass. But that's a caricature. Bible scholars have never believed that. The idea is that God creates all living things in exactly the form we see them today, and they don't change over time at all. There's no change. Some have gone extinct, but there's no change. Nobody believed that. That's a caricature. Even the people, before Darwin, or around the time of Darwin, Bible scholars knew that wasn't the case. But because if that was the case, then how many dogs would Noah have had to take with him on the ark? Every single variety, right? And the Bible scholars knew that, okay, now there's not enough room on the ark for all of this. There is enough room if it's not a tree, it's not a lawn, it's an orchard or a forest. God creates kinds of living things, and there's diversity within a kind. Then the story of Noah and the flood works, and actually this fits with both Bible and science. Once again, the Bible and science unite against evolution. It's wonderful how that works. So evolution's information problem is this. In order for the story of evolution to be true, it requires an information-gaining process. That's the name of the game for biological evolution. More information, more information, more information. But natural selection is an information-losing process. That's why I said when we started, natural selection has nothing to do with evolution. That's not what the secular textbooks will say. They love natural selection because natural selection produces changes, genetic changes, generation after generation. And evolutionists love that. And they think, well, just add millions of years and you can evolve one kind into another. But the direction of the change is the direction is going the wrong way. Evolution requires from simple to supposedly simple. Even a single cell is incredibly complex, but they say simple life to more complex. Natural selection takes things the opposite direction. So if we think of evolution theory at a very basic level, say a junior high introduction to science level, we could write it as an equation here, if you like, a math equation. Natural selection plus mutations are supposed to equal evolution from one kind to another. So it's mutations that are supposed to provide for the new features and functions, and then natural selection comes along and eliminates the less fit. And at that sort of very, very basic level, it seems like it should work, right? Why doesn't that work? Well, natural selection doesn't do what the evolutionists want it to do. Are mutations the savior? Are mutations going to save the day for evolution? Let's have a look at mutations. What are mutations? Mutations are random changes to the genetic code. Now, already that doesn't sound real positive, does it? If you have a complex code and you make random changes to it, is it going to make it better or worse? If we had, for example, the sheet music to Beethoven's glorious Ninth Symphony, and we taped it up on the walls here, and then we blindfolded ourselves and went around with markers and try and add notes at random, are we going to improve it or make it worse? We're going to make it worse, right? So these changes are the result mostly of copying mistakes. When DNA is copied, so when there's cell division, like we all began as a single cell inside mom and with one copy of our DNA. And then we were 2 and then 4 and then 8 and then 16. So every time the DNA is copied, that's where errors creep in, copying mistakes. Those are mutations. That's most of the time where it happens. And they're bad. Mutations are bad. The popular notion of mutations is that they're good. Is that what you know, if you get bitten by a radioactive spider, then you can start shooting spider webs out of your arms and crawl up buildings and stuff like that. That's in the comic books. That's in movies. That's the role of mutations there. You get better. Here's what mutations actually do. They corrupt the information. You get fingers that haven't grown properly and legs growing out animals' necks and stuff like that. If they don't outright kill the organism before it's even born, most mutations do that. They just never get very far in the growth process. Still inside mom, they just never make it to birth. But we talked about dogs a few minutes ago. Let's talk about mutations in humans. We'll get a little more personal now. Mutations accumulate as we age. Today, we're all trillions of cells. And as we age, our cells get old, and then that one falls away. There's cell division. A new cell is produced. And again, every time the DNA is copied, there's some mutations that creep in. So as we grow, as we age, we get more and more mutations. So that by the time you're 15, we don't have any 15-year-olds here, but by the time you're 15, the average cell in your body has 6,000 mutations. We're all X-Men. We're all mutants, thousands of times over. The average skin cell in a 60-year-old, I'm not 60 yet, but the average skin cell in a 60-year-old has 40,000 mutations. It's no wonder your skin isn't soft and rubbery like a little baby anymore, right? And no amount of oil of delay is going to stop that either. It's mutations. And it's not just your skin, it's happening with all your tissues, your liver, your stomach, your kidneys, everything's going downhill. In fact, mutations, if you die of so-called natural causes, you've mutated yourself to death. That's morbid, but that's what's happening. If you die of natural causes, you've died of your own mutations. That's what's going on there. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Some mutations are passed on to the next generation, so that every new generation of people, actually of all living things, but we'll talk about people, every new generation of people starts life off having more mutations than their parents had when they started life off. And this fact was very concerning to human population geneticists, evolutionary human population geneticists back in the 60s and 70s. They were concerned that the rate of mutations entering the human population might be as high as one new mutation every single human generation. If the rates are that high, they thought, well, then we would be extinct by now. If we evolved, like 1 million years ago from an ape-like ancestor, or well, a little bit more than that, and then before that it was like lemurs or something, and millions of years ago was worms or a single cell. If the mutations are damaging our genetic code, so that it doesn't work anymore. You can't have millions of years of human evolution if the rates are too high. That's why they were concerned about the rate of mutations entering the human population. Now, that was back in the 60s and 70s. What are the leading human populationists saying today about the rates of mutations? Not just 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, 100 to 300. Every single generation. What would that look like? Imagine this is your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, or Adam and Eve, same thing. 100 mutations per person per generation. Let's go with a low estimate. It's probably more than that. But that means that everybody in the next generation would already have about 100 more mutations than their parents had. And the next generation, 200. And the next generation, it just goes onward and upward from there. That is catastrophic for human evolution over millions of years. We would already be dead. And in fact, that's what the leading human population geneticists, most of whom are evolutionists, that's what they're saying. One of them said, why aren't we dead yet? How come humans still exist? They're racking their brains trying to figure this out. Alexei Kondrashov is one of the world's leading human population geneticists. Here's the full title of an article he wrote a number of years ago. Contamination of the genome by very slightly deleterious, that means deleting, mutations. And the subtitle, Why Have We Not Died 100 Times Over? He and other leading population geneticists are trying to figure out why are we not dead yet? And of course, we're not dead because we haven't been evolving for millions of years. There's interesting thinking about even the decay curve of lifespans after Noah's flood. There's something happened genetically there. The whole human population was bottlenecked at the time of the flood. People lived almost 1,000 years. Maybe people lived more than 1,000 years before the flood. We don't know. The oldest recorded living individuals, Methuselah, 969 years. Maybe we don't know about others. But after the flood, the genetic effects of mutations had a major role there. That was very, very interesting, thinking about mutations and so on, all kinds of different things. But what can we say here? All right. Life is based on information. Information comes only from intelligence. Therefore, an intelligent designer is needed for life. Those are pretty basic, straightforward conclusions, right? Life is based on information. Information comes only from intelligence, so you need an intelligent designer. It's a great time to be a Christian. Natural selection, genetic change, adaptation, mutations, even antibiotic resistance all support the Bible's history. All of those processes are downhill processes genetically. It's a great time to be a Christian. The more that scientists discover, even about the complexities of life at the smallest level, or how the cell works, or things like that, it's a cause for a happy dance that all of us can do. God's word is true. Wonderful. And it matches the world around us, what scientists are coming up with. So Creation Magazine, again, has lots of great information about biology. There's often articles on biology and genetics in the magazine. Again, it's our #1 equipping tool. We don't need to go through the whole spiel, but if you're, the sign-up forms are up here. We're not going to pass them around again, but we can do that afterwards. So you fill those in, and they're double-sided. There we go. The free stuff, creation.com, obviously has lots of articles on biology and genetics, all kinds of different things. We've done a number of episodes of the TV show on that topic as well. Evolution's Achilles Heels, I've mentioned that book before. That's cutting-edge science. That's one of our newer books. And this is the one that's authored by 9 PhD scientists that blow evolution out of the water. And there's chapters on natural selection and genetics, elaborating on some of this stuff that I've gone over very quickly. And there's a DVD as well. Like if you have maybe grown children who've gone to university and they left the church and so on, and they think, well, mom and dad, you're not scientifically literate. Science supports evolution. I'm going with logic. I'm going with science and so on. get them the, I don't know, book or DVD. If you have readers, the book might be the way to go, but I'd suggest starting with the DVD. We interview 15 PhD scientists that go through the same topics as you'll find in the book. The book has way more detail than the interviews. But you might start with that and see what they say. If you know people who are convinced that science supports evolution, this is, consider getting this DVD into their hands. And then if they're open to more, the book has way more details. Dr. Don Batten does a great, one of our scientists from our Australian office, he covers in this DVD kind of what I did here. He clarifies the difference between natural selection and evolution, molecules to man evolution. It's a great DVD for students going into high school, getting into biology and so on, because again, in the schools, the kids are getting a snow job. The teachers and textbooks are saying, well, natural selection is evolution. It's the same thing. No, it's not. And Dr. Batten does a great job of clarifying why they're not the same thing. Yes, natural selection. Natural selection is a fact. It happens. Creationists wrote on it before Darwin. The information about the human genome rapidly going downhill came from this book here. Dr. John Sanford. He's actually one of the world's leading geneticists. He's retired now, but wrote this book, just massive, massive problems with human evolution over millions of years. This one here, Refuting Evolution, I think we've still got some left. Yes, this one is great for public education students in the public education system, because it's our response to a book given to teachers all over the US. Here are the evidences that you use in your classroom to convince students that evolution is true. Use these evidences. This book deals with all of those evidences and refutes them. So it's perfectly geared to what people are learning in school, in high school, and even in university and beyond and so on. The Genesis Academy, that's going to deal with animals changing and the flood and the ark and how do we explain all the species today and so on. And there's a bunch of other stuff there. But yeah, don't forget to hand in the forms. And that's it for biology. But let's go right into questions here. And what I'm going to do is, yes, all right. Here are some, these are common questions that people have. If you see something up here, you can just shout out the number and we can do that. And oh yes, for the sake of the video, I need to remember to repeat the question, because this is being recorded and it'll be up on YouTube for the folks who aren't here. But I said we'd start with radiometric dating. That's up here, number 5 there. Doesn't radiometric dating prove that the Earth is old? Now, how many of you have heard of carbon dating? You heard that term? Okay, that's pretty popular. Carbon dating doesn't give millions of years. It's still under the umbrella of the title of radiometric dating, because it is nuclear dating. It's using something that's radioactive that decays into something stable over time. But it's often its own little category. Carbon dating dates things that were once living, and it dates it back to the time when they died. And carbon-14 is way too radioactive. It never gets to millions of years. Theoretically, you can measure things that are maybe 80,000 or 90,000 years old, not million, thousands of years only, maybe up to 100,000 years. Carbon-14 decays much too quickly. So that's not the one, that doesn't fit with evolution. It's the dating methods that evolutionists trumpet, that they promote, are rocks. They date rocks. Carbon dating dates things that were once living, and it's dating of rocks, specifically molten rocks. So here's how this works. A molten rock gets thrown up out of the earth, and only igneous rocks, only rocks that were once molten, can be dated with this. And so a rock gets thrown up out of the earth, it cools and solidifies, and it'll encapsulate something that's radioactive at the time. Rubidium decays into strontium, potassium into argon, uranium into lead. Those are some of the isotopes that evolutionists use in this dating method. And what you do to get an age for that rock is, nobody measures an age of anything, right? We have telescopes and we have microscopes. We don't have pastascopes. That's not how it works. They measure 2 of the elements in the rock, the radioactive parent product and the amount of the stable daughter product that it has decayed into. And if you measure the amounts of those 2 elements, then you can calculate, you can infer an age. That's how it works. And so far, so good. In theory, that should be fine. But the theory, the problem comes in the assumptions that you have to make. Every dating method involves making assumptions. And there's over 200 ways to age date the Earth or the oceans or what have you. Only 10% of all those dating methods give ages that are way up in the clouds, that would support evolution. 90% of the dating methods give an age that's far too young for evolution. But it's these 10%, and radiometric dating is among those 10% that give these really high ages. Now, and every dating method involves making assumptions. What are the assumptions necessary to calculate an age with radiometric dating? There's three major assumptions. You have to assume, number one, that when that rock was thrown up out of the Earth, it didn't already encapsulate some of the daughter product. You have to assume that all of the two things that you're measuring, all of the daughter product is the result of nuclear decay. If there already was some there when the rock formed, that's going to artificially inflate the date for your sample. And there's many papers that have been written over many years indicating that that's what's going on. The daughter product is already there. Even in the case of potassium argon. Argon is a gas, so the assumption was that, well, no, there's not going to be any there when the rock is formed. But there is. Assumption number two, you have to assume that nuclear decay rates have been constant, going back to infinity past. And for many years, we didn't have any good data to suggest that it wasn't constant. Everybody knew that it was an assumption, but now that's very different. There's great evidence for accelerated nuclear decay in the relatively recent past, say at the time of the flood and probably during creation week as well. And so that assumption number two, is now a big question mark. Assumption number three, you have to assume during the history of the life of that rock, none of the parent product or daughter product were added or removed. In the case of the uranium-lead method, both of those elements dissolve in water. So if that rock was anywhere near a rain or a river or oceans or lakes or whatever, who's to say that more uranium hadn't been leached in or leached out, or lead leached in or leached out? All of those assumptions play havoc with the dating method. And we've dated some samples ourselves. We sent them to the same labs that everybody uses at the universities. We took samples, I mentioned Mount St. Helens a couple of times. Mount St. Helens is a very unusual volcano. The mountain exploded. The mountain blew up. If you go on Google Earth, it looks like a horseshoe from the top. The entire north side of the mountain has been exploded out over the landscape. And since that was May 18th, 1980, where the mountain blew up. And since that time, see, lava continues to squeeze up through the neck of the volcano, and it forms what's called the lava dome. It's about 1,000 feet across, 1,000 feet tall, and there's been many lava domes since the mountain originally blew up in 1980. Well, we've taken samples from the lava dome. Those rocks were formed after the mountain was removed, right? These are new rocks that formed after 1980, and we did this when we did this around the year 2000. When those rocks were about 20 years old, or less than 20 years old. And we sent the samples away to the same labs that everybody uses, and some of the samples came out to hundreds of thousands, some of them into the millions of years old. They're less than 20-year-old rocks. So the dating method doesn't work. There's assumptions that go into it that are very questionable, and then you test actual samples, and they're way off. It doesn't really work. So anyways, there's a couple of people asked about radiometric dating, so there's a bit of information. Obviously, there's more information on the website, and there's a chapter in the Creation Answers book that deals with that in greater detail as well. All right, so we got that out of the way. Are there any questions at this point? Number 12. Number 12 is where was the Garden of Eden? Could have been here. We have no idea. We have no idea, and there's no way to find out. And that might sound like a bit of a strange response, because if you have a study Bible, you probably have a map in the first few chapters of Genesis that says, well, the Garden of Eden was probably around the current, like today's Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's in Iraq, in the Middle East. Those rivers come together in Iraq, and there's often a map showing, well, maybe Eden was around here in our Bibles. I disagree. Why? The flood destroyed everything. But why do we have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers? Then that comes up. Because those aren't the same rivers. those rivers today are flowing on top of not just feet, but miles of flood-deposited sedimentary rock. We have oil over in the Middle East there. It's famous for that. Those are post-flood rivers, not pre-flood rivers that we read about in Genesis chapter 2. They're not the same rivers. So another question, why do they have those names then? Because we have those names before the flood. Well, our office is in Kitchener, Ontario, and if you drive about an hour west of our office on the 401 there, you get to London, Ontario. And London, Ontario has the Thames River flowing through it. That's not the original London, that's not the original Thames. How come we have those names in southern Ontario? Well, we all know it's because the settlers from the old world brought those names with them. We have a Cambridge and an Oxford County, and there's all kinds of names from the old world. And we can imagine the same thing happening after the flood. So Noah and his wife, or their 3 sons, or their wives, they may have said, you know what? We've landed here in this area, and those 2 big rivers here, why don't we name them for with names that we're familiar with from the old world? So, but those are not the same rivers. And the Bible says that they had one source, and there was 4 rivers that separated. The Tigris and Euphrates today have 2 different sources, and they come together. So the topography isn't even the same. It doesn't line up. We would have no idea where the Garden of Eden was, and no way to find out. It could have been here. And on top of that, the continents moved around during the flood. So no way to find out. Yep. And yes? The Jordan River, I'm not sure about that. So the question was, has the Jordan River dried up? I was in Israel in, what was that, 98. I was there with the same group, the Institute for Creation Research, that did the Grand Canyon tour. They did such a good job on that, and then they let us, they said, hey, in a few years we hope to do an Israel tour. And I thought, oh man, they did such a good job with the Grand Canyon tour. I'm going to go with them to Israel. You can go with just about any ministry to Israel. Everybody does Israel trips. But, so I was there in 98, and I was shocked because as kids growing up in Sunday school, we read about, the Hebrews crossing the Jordan River into the Promised Land, and God had to stop the water and so on, and that kind of thing. And you get to the Jordan River, and there's a little bridge that our tour bus went over, and it's a creek. And it's like, that's it? I had visualized something bigger in my little mind in Sunday school. But yeah, and has it dried up now? I wasn't even aware of that. Okay, well, the Jordan... Well, climate change gets the blame for everything, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the headwaters are in, well, there's various springs there that feed into it, but it comes, a lot of it comes from Mount Hermon, which is snow-covered, and that's just north of the Golan Heights there. Yeah, there was plenty of water there in 98. I don't know if, and that feeds the Lake of Galilee and then ultimately the Dead Sea. Everything flows into the Dead Sea, 1,300 feet below sea level. But yeah, I don't know. And yeah, that's not really a creation question. I'm not familiar with it, but yeah. And yes? Yes, okay. Okay, for the sake of the video, is that the camera? Yeah. The question was, what about God creating with the appearance of age, right? That's sort of where you were going with that. That's a term that implies deception. And so we steer clear of that. So God creates something that's young but actually looks old. Rather than using that term, we would say that instead of God creating with the appearance of age, when something's actually just been created, he creates a functionally complete creation. So here's the difference in the real world between those terms. So created with the appearance of age. Let's imagine On day 6 of creation, Adam has just met Eve, and he wants to be romantic at night and make a campfire, and they watch the stars and so on. And so he gets out his chainsaw to cut down a 6-foot diameter redwood tree and make a nice bonfire there and stuff. So if we go, all the guys are saying yes, but if we go with the appearance of age terminology, Adam would see tree rings. Tree rings are an indication of changes in growth cycle between summer and winter, that kind of thing. If we go with, and that may have caused Adam to question God and say, well, God, wait a minute. Didn't you make me on day 6 of creation and plants on day 3, just 3 days before me? This tree hasn't experienced any seasonal variation in growth. What's going on here? It implies deception, right? So instead of that, rather, no tree rings. It's a fully complete, 300-foot tall redwood tree, but it does not have the appearance of age. It's a working, functional tree, but it doesn't have the appearance of age. That's the difference. And so we would favor that second explanation rather than saying God created things deliberately to look old when they really weren't. And that's going down a road that we don't want to go down too far. So I hope that helps. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Yes?
This is a little offbeat, but didn't age start with sin?
Didn't age start with sin? For humans,
Wouldn't the entire world start to age with sin?
well, humans would have lived forever. And that will be the plan again. When God restores the new heavens and new earth, we'll put off the imperishable, and we'll put off the perishable and take on the imperishable, 1 Corinthians 15. And so that is the plan, and it will be the plan again.
What I'm trying to say is, if there had been no sin, there wouldn't be any age, there wouldn't be no death.
For people, animals may have done, yeah. I don't think we can extrapolate it that far. I think we're reading things into Scripture if we say, well, that the whole creation would have, never worn out and that kind of thing. So there were things happening, and also the Bible does make it clear that God foreknew that Adam and Eve would sin. So the world that originally is not exactly how it's going to be in the new heavens and new earth, where, there will be no death, and there will likely be animals there, and we'll likely see dinosaurs again, very likely. Extinct species that have gone extinct because of sin will likely be in the new heavens and new earth. And so they're similar, but not the same, before the fall and the new heavens and new earth. So we need to be careful there, saying that everything would have just existed eternally had Adam and Eve not sinned. Yes?
I have two questions. One is, when in the Garden of Eden, whenever Satan tempted Eve, the serpent talked, and that didn't seem to be too big of a shock to her.
Right.
Do you think
Yes.
animals could talk or in the beginning? And then my second question was, how did freshwater and saltwater fish survive?
Right, okay. We'll start with the second one. Freshwater and saltwater have an ability to remain separate for a long time. But that happens today, but certainly in the flood, everything would have been mixed together. It was very catastrophic and so on. You have the oceans being evaporated and falling several times, so everything would have been mixed up. Today, we've had 6,000 years of animals becoming adapted to certain environments. So animals today are much more specialized and adapted to their environments. If we go back in time, animals would have very likely been more robust, capable of handling differences in environment and not having a problem with it. And so back then, the ocean was probably less salty as well, because salt continues to go, the ocean gets saltier and saltier over time, lots of salt going into the ocean. So oceans were less salty, and actually, we don't know how much salt was originally in the oceans. We can test it now. The flood would have probably put huge amounts of salt into the oceans in an amount we don't know. So before the flood, the oceans may not have been that salty anyway. And animals would have had an easier time. Nowadays, some animals can only live in salt water, and some animals can only live in fresh water. But back then, again, they're more robust. The saltiness of the ocean probably would have been less, and we don't know the level of the salinity of the ocean before the flood anyway. So that helps to kind of figure that one out.
When I go back to the natural selection, they're actually losing things. Animals are more specific to it.
Yes.
Environment now.
Yes. Yeah, they're all closer to extinction. You have like the panda. The panda is the poster child for extinction, right? You have and that kind of thing. It can only eat, what is it, eucalyptus, or is that no? That's the koala eats eucalyptus. The bamboo is the panda. Yeah, it only eats bamboo. You have to give it a very specialized diet. If it's slightly off, well, they'll just die. You know, they're at the end of the line genetically. If you go back in time, they would have been more robust, capable of eating whatever. You know, but so yeah, Eve was not surprised by a talking serpent, and it's interesting that. Well, there's one major change anyways. The Bible says, God speaks to the serpent, Satan, you're going to crawl on your belly. Well then, okay, before that time, it had legs and walked around, right? So it was different. We don't have any fossils, but that was the flood, but this was long before that. So there was a major change there. And then I think C.S. Lewis was onto something with his Narnia series. Because there you have in Narnia, if you're familiar with the books or the movies, the animals can talk. Yes, well that was miraculous. That was God miraculously speaking through the donkey there. Before the flood, it didn't seem to be miraculous. Eve just thought, oh, this is normal run-of-the-mill stuff. I'm talking to this snake here. Seems a little odd to us today, but yeah, maybe it was something like Narnia. Maybe C.S. Lewis was onto something there, and perhaps it's interesting to consider these things. Maybe take them with a grain of salt, because we're just not given the details. How was it audible? Was it telepathic? What was going on there? It seems to be audible. It seems to be just that Eve was talking to the serpent. It doesn't seem to be like a telepathic thing, like she could hear what the snake was saying in her mind, kind of. It seems to be just normal vocal cords and making sounds. That seems to be what it says. But there are only a few details there about what that could have been. But yeah, it seems like, and as I said a couple times already, maybe C.S. Lewis was onto something, and who knows what the relationship between animals and humans will be like in the new heavens and new earth. You know, interesting thinking about some of these things. And, yes, sir.
So went back to the dividing of the continents. So am I correct in my understanding then that entire process happened over the 1 year of the flood? That entire separation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That would have, our understanding is that, because it all starts with looking at the continents. Clearly, there's many lines of evidence that indicate that the continents have moved apart. So the question for us as Christians is when and how. When is the only place it can happen is during the flood. And in fact, the more closely that scientists have looked at, Bible-believing scientists have looked at it, it was probably that process that God used to initiate the flood. The breakup of the original supercontinent, the fountains of the great deep, is that what's being described with the ocean water being evaporated? It's massive steam fountains there, and then the windows of heaven open. It's that the torrential rain as a result of that process. Is that what Genesis 6 is describing there? Yeah, that may be. And yeah, and the continents move. Yeah, I didn't point out the speed. There was speed in the charts there, that the outputs from Dr. Baumgartner's model. It has meters per second. Like we're talking kilometers per hour of the 30, 40 kilometers per hour of billions and billions of tons of rock moving across the mantle of the earth. Like the damage and hazard that would have produced. And so you can, at those speeds, it doesn't even take a year to open up the Atlantic and things like that. And then you have continents smashing against each other and mountain ranges and buckling and folding and all kinds of stuff going on there. It's a very robust model that really, you know, you look at the Appalachian Mountains if you drive down to Florida or something, or you look at the Rockies out in Calgary, or the coastal mountains of running up and down North and South America, you down into Chile and so on. You've got the mountains there, and where the plates, and you think, okay, this was a global flood, and that did that, and this happened. It's a lot of things happening there. But yeah, that fits without too much difficulty in a global flood at the kind of speeds that the model is suggesting. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Number 16, how do people live so long?
16, yes, okay. How did people live so long before the flood? Have you heard of, I'm guessing most of you have, this is a model that we talked about for many years, the water vapor canopy model. The idea that there was a layer of water vapor around the earth. You've heard that before. And that would have, and it would have shielded out harmful cosmic rays from space. It would have produced a nice greenhouse effect. And that was meant to be the source of the 40 days and 40 nights of rain. That water vapor canopy was then collapsed at the time of the flood, and it produced a global flood. That was the model. Many of you nodded your heads. Yes, I've heard of that before. Now, for those of you who said, yes, I've heard of that, are you aware that for the past at least 25 years that we've ditched that?
Same reason. The sun's rays coming through it, we made the earth boil.
Yes. There's scientific problems with it. You mentioned one of them. It would create far too powerful a greenhouse effect. And these scientific problems were discovered by creationists. So there's scientific problems against it, discovered by creationists. You don't need it to explain the things that it was meant to explain. It was meant to answer question 16 here. If you shield out all the harmful cosmic rays from space, it was thought years ago that would lead to, if you change the environment, it would lead to people, lasting to about 1,000 years. We now know that that's not going to do it. It's not environmental, it's genetic. So, and you don't need a vapor canopy to get a greenhouse effect. There was a greenhouse effect before the flood. All you need is more CO2. And there's great evidence for way more CO2 in the atmosphere before the flood than there was today. At least 10 times, probably around 15 times more CO2 before the flood. That would lead to, see, CO2 is plant food. Trudeau calls it a pollutant. Try removing all of it. We'll all die, okay? It's plant food. It's good stuff. But the main culprit in greenhouse warming is water vapor. But you can't tax water vapor. You can tax. Let's move on. Okay. No, we need more politics in church, I think. But that's a different subject. Let's move on. I already said we'll move on. We're not moving on. Okay. There's powerful science against it. It's not, vapor canopy isn't needed to explain what it was meant to explain. People living to almost 1,000 years here, question 16. And the Bible doesn't actually support a vapor canopy. Let's start with that one. The Bible says, okay, right, on day 2, God separates the waters below the expanse, or the firmament, from the waters above the firmament. And there's a distance, the firmament, in between the waters below and the waters above. The waters below, that one's pretty easy to figure out. That's the oceans. That's oceans and ponds and lakes. There's water below the firmament. And so the waters above the firmament, if we look at day 5, God places into the firmament birds and flying creatures. So the location of the waters above the firmament could be in the upper atmosphere, right? But on day 4, previous day, God placed into the firmament, same word, the sun, moon, and stars. So now what's the location of the waters above the firmament? They're not in the atmosphere. They're somewhere out in space. And different things have been proposed. They're in our solar system somewhere, or they're somewhere in the Milky Way, or they're somewhere in interstellar space, or maybe those are that's the boundary of our physical universe. It's billions of light years out there, and that's the waters above, and in between all of that, we have all the stars and galaxies. There's a number of different ways of understanding where they could be, and that's an ongoing area of research among creationist astrophysicists and that kind of thing. But and furthermore, the Bible says, for example, in the Psalms, King David writes, "Praise him, ye heavens, praise him, ye waters above the heavens." The waters above the heavens were still in place at the time of King David. They were not precipitated at the time of the flood. So to our shame as creationists, we all promoted, all the major creation organizations promoted that for a long time. We should have known better. The Bible doesn't support it. And then, okay, the Bible doesn't support it. Then we started doing research and discovered that, as you already mentioned, the surface temperature of the earth, because of the greenhouse effect that it would produce far too powerful a greenhouse effect. The surface temperature would be around 300 Celsius. That's way above the boiling point. You'd vaporize all the water on Earth and life would be fried. You know, it's impossible. One of the scientists working on that, Dr. Larry Vardaman, he's an atmospheric scientist. He's been retired for years now, but I still follow him on Facebook. He got a hold of some pretty sophisticated weather software. He worked at ICR, the Institute for Creation Research. They're in Dallas. They used to be in San Diego. And he put in all the variables for a vapor canopy in this software, and then hit go, and you see what changes based on the variables that you change. And then this discovery was made. And he tried everything to try to get the surface temperature down to something manageable, something where life could survive. He couldn't do it. I heard him give a paper on this way back in '98 in Pittsburgh. And he was there presenting a paper on this, and he prefaced it by saying, look, I'm going to give this one more shot to try to make it work, and then I'm just going to let it go. He had, even by that point, he hadn't been real supportive of a vapor canopy, whereas years before, he was one of its biggest promoters. As an atmospheric scientist, that's his field. And so anyways, there's science against it. And it's not that, you can't dramatically change how long you'll live by changing your environment. You can shield out all the harmful cosmic rays from space that you want and eat healthy food and exercise. You might extend your life by a few months or a couple of years or something, but you're not going to get to 1,000 years. That's not going to work. It's genetic. That we talked about mutations already. Mutations play a big role in aging. Also, there are things on the ends of our chromosomes called telomeres. These are bits of repeating DNA, same information over and over again. Every time there's cell division, you lose a little bit of telomere. It gets cut off. And eventually, when the telomere is gone, the cell can no longer reproduce, and so the cell dies. And so there are expiration dates, if you want to think of it that way, built into the telomere, built into the cell via the telomeres. And so the simple answer to how people lived so long before the flood is not that the environment was different. It was their genes were better. They had fewer mutations, and they probably had longer telomeres. The cells could reproduce themselves many, many more times before they would die. And so that there's other factors that we know there are other factors. It's not quite that simple, but mutations and these telomeres are a huge, that was a big breakthrough, actually. That happened when, do you remember Dolly, the first successfully cloned animal, Dolly the sheep? Yeah. Dolly aged and died very quickly. They actually, they actually had to put her down because she got diseases common in much older sheep. And that's when this discovery of the telomeres and their effect on aging happened. It was a breakthrough in the science of aging, how we age and why we die and so on. They used adult cells to clone Dolly, cells that already had shortened telomeres. And that's when this discovery was made. Oh, wow, these telomeres really affect aging and so on. And so that was a major discovery back there. It's genetic. So if you know when your dad died, it's mostly through the line of the males. If you track back to your ancestors and when they died, if they died of natural causes, of course, you can estimate fairly closely how long you're gonna have. I mean, of course, there's always accidents and things that happen, but it's genetic. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a long answer to a short question. Should we do one more? What time is it? Okay. Well, are we supposed to end at 3? In that case, we got more than 10 minutes left. We can keep going.
Trouble with the DNA stuff. So you're saying the DNA is the reason, right? It lived for 1,000 years. And then it started happening, went from 1,000 to no 600. Then Moses was 120. And then the Bible tells us in Psalms it's average 70 years.
Yeah.
Why haven't we kept going down from 70 years to nothing? Why aren't we disappeared now? Because of the bad DNA that keeps reproducing.
we live longer today because of technology, medical technology. No, we're continuing to accumulate mutations. Our genes are not getting better, but we have medical technology. People who would normally have died with some of the diseases that we have, nowadays you have penicillin, you have all kinds of things that can prolong life. So it's not that our genes are getting better. we have medical technology. And Noah actually lived to 950 years. He was 600 when he boarded the ark, right? You mentioned 600 there. If it was environmental, we would expect that Noah, who gets off the ark when he's 601, he'd be the first one to die, right? If the environment from before the flood to after the flood was the cause of people living so long, Noah's 601 when he gets off the ark. But he still had the good genes. He outlives many of his grandkids, many of his offspring. He dies at 950. So he still had the good genes. But yeah, so it's not in the environment that causes people to live long or caused people to live long back in the day. It's genetic.
He must have accumulated a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What do you think the ark was after the flood? It was a shed.
Yeah, that's how power tools were invented or something. All right, shall we do a few more? We've got about 10 minutes until our official end here. Are there any more questions? Yes.
I just have a funny one to follow up my dad's question. What brand of jeans should I be buying?
What brand of jeans? I can't, do you have a response? Or
No, I'm asking you.
yeah, I can't think of anything witty so quickly. We got Levi's. We got the ones from Costco. We got the one. Levi, yes, the line of priests. Hey, there we go. Okay, we got something. We got a joke here. The makings of a good joke. All right, what jeans should I wear to expand to extend my life? Levi's. Any other questions or any other jokes? We're gonna have a joke time. 18. Okay, let's do 18. How can we see the light from distant galaxies? That is for some people have never considered that before. For others, I met a gentleman. This was about 6 years ago at an event like this. He came up to me and he said, "I rejected Christ because of that question. I thought that Christians will never, ever have an answer to that question. Therefore, the Bible must be wrong, so I don't need to listen to you talk to me about Jesus." Now, when he talked to me about this, he was a Christian because somebody explained to him or put some thoughts out there that there may be an answer to answering this. If God created recently, we can still see the light from galaxies that are hundreds of millions of light years away. So there are currently about 5 or 6 different biblically based models to answer that question. I'll give you one of them, and then we'll maybe move on to something else before our time runs out here, because a lot of them involve using Einstein's theory of relativity. And whenever you mention Einstein, things are going to get hairy, right? But Einstein said in the early 1900s, about 100 years ago, that gravity affects time. In a stronger gravitational field, time slows down. Okay? Now, as wacky as that sounds, Einstein was right. I used a GPS to get here to the church this morning and to get to the hotel last night, and the GPS units in our vehicles or in our devices communicate with satellites up in space in a lesser gravitational field. The engineers that designed and built that system, they had to tune the clocks on the satellites to run slower so that they'd run at the same rate as the clocks in our devices. If they hadn't have taken that into account, that's gravitational time dilation is what that's called. If they hadn't have taken that into account, every time you turn on your GPS, after an hour, be off by half a kilometer, approximately. 2 hours, a full kilometer. The system wouldn't work. So as crazy as Einstein's notion was 100 years ago, he was right. Gravity impacts time. Now, here's what it has to do with answering that question. The Bible says in about a dozen different places, God stretched out the heavens like a tent or like a curtain. Well, that means there have been large-scale changes to the structure of the universe. If everything before the stretching was closer together, what are the relativistic effects of that? If all the matter in the universe used to be closer together before the stretching, then gravity here is going to be a lot higher than gravity way out here where there's hardly any matter. And Einstein said, if you have a big difference in gravity, you have a big difference in the rate at which time flows from one to the other, or between, relative to each other. And so it's possible that if the Earth is near the center of all that matter, and there's good evidence that the Earth is near the center of the visible universe, but that's a question for another time, gravity around the Earth would have been very high, while gravity way out here is very low. So it's possible that while minutes or seconds tick by on Earth, millions or billions of years elapse way out here, plenty of time to allow the light from those objects to get to Earth, so that on day 6 of creation, when Adam and Eve look up at the night sky, they see approximately the same night sky we see today. So I've left out many details, but there's a chapter in the Creation Answers book that deals with that, and we've got articles on the website as well. Just type in starlight and time, for example, in the search window, and you'll get scholarly articles there with formulas and Einstein's relativity and all the rest of it. I'm getting like a deer in the headlights looks here from some people, like, what? Gravity affects time, and what are you talking about? And can I employ some of that at night when I'm sleeping? But anyway, yeah, and that's not all the explanations. The biblically based models to explain how we're seeing light from distant galaxies use relativity. Many of them do, but some of them don't. So the bottom line is there are answers. It's not this insurmountable thing that some people, like the gentleman I met 6 years ago, he thought it was, you're never going to get an answer. But there are. And
you
so.
mentioned that there's references to God stretching the universe. Do you recall any of those off the top of your head, or have you looked that up in the Bible?
Just go to like Bible Gateway or something and do a search on the word stretched out, or stretched out or spread out. And you'll find about a dozen different verses or so that use that terminology. God stretched out the heavens or spread out the heavens, even implying a fabric to space, which is very interesting to astrophysicists, but that's a discussion for another time. But yeah. All right, I think we got time for one more. Is there anybody who wants to finish us off here? Number 4. How old is the Earth? Well, I've mentioned 6,000 years. Just in passing, without backing that up with anything, we can calculate, and many people have, we can calculate the age of the Earth in a number of different ways. One of the ways, just very simply, just to get ballpark figures to do that, is in our Bibles, in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, we have genealogies, and they are chronogenealogies. They have the chronology, the time between each of the individuals listed there. We have the exact year from the creation of Adam to the birth of Abraham, 2008 years. And so you just go backwards from Abraham about 2,000 years, but when was Abraham born? Around 2000 BC. That's not really controversial. Both Bible-believing and non-Bible-believing historians, we pretty much agree Abraham was born around 2000 BC, 1900 to 2100, somewhere in that range. And so if Abraham was born around 2000 BC, just back up another 2008 years or so, and that gets you to around 4000 BC. And so that's one of the ways of calculating that. You can work it other ways, looking the reign of the kings and so on, and work it back other ways using other books of the Bible. But that's one of the ways. That's pretty simple. Just when did Abraham live, and just count backwards from there. Now, as far as the tolerance, like how close can we, with accuracy, how close can we get to that? Well, there are 20 generations between Adam and Abraham. And the Bible doesn't give us the birth day, only the birth year of those people. You know, when Adam was 130, then Seth was born. When Seth was so on, so it just gives us the year. So we don't know if Adam had just turned 130 or if it was just before his 131st birthday. So we could add almost a full year to each of those 20 genealogies, each of those 20 names. So it's 2008 plus up to almost 20 years. You can't get to 20 years because then it will be the next number. But so 2008 plus up to less than 20 years. So you've got a bit of tolerance there, but then when was Abraham born? Then it keys off of that. So, but we can get fairly close to around 6,000 years ago, around 4,000 BC. Yeah. So that's one way to calculate the age of the earth. Anyways, thank you so much for those of you who stuck around after lunch. And I didn't notice a lot of bobbing heads. You didn't like, huh? What? I'm awake. But well done. So, and if I didn't get to your question or answer it with your satisfaction, go to the website. Go to creation.com. And there's lots more information there that you could have a look at and share it. Share it with people who aren't here. Share it with people that you know are struggling with Christianity. It's amazing. So the way God uses some of this stuff is amazing. It turns people on to, like, I'll just share my own testimony. I grew up in a church, wonderful church, sort of, not great teaching, shallow teaching and that kind of thing. We didn't talk about any of this. It was like the students that we interviewed there. Did you ever get, apologetics information showing why the Bible's true? And no, we didn't. I didn't really get any of that growing up. Then I heard a creation speaker. Blew my mind. Walked out with armloads of books and DVDs, and I saw a dramatic increase in my faith. Suddenly, I was listening to the Sunday morning sermon. Before that time, I was, okay, let's open our Bibles to the, 2 Kings 5 and so on. And I'd be thinking, well, how do we even know hasn't that changed down through the years, the text and everything? And how do we know this? And what about this? And suddenly it was, no, the Bible's the Word of God. We're looking at 1 Corinthians today. Okay, let's get my Bible open. Let's follow this along. Suddenly I was interested. I would come home on Sunday morning after the Sunday morning service, and I would watch sermons on VHS tapes. I would watch more sermons eating my lunch. And I caught myself once. I thought, man, this is weird. A few years ago, I wouldn't have been doing this. But my whole desire to know more of God and His Son and what He's done to save sinners completely changed as a result of this stuff. So have hope. If there's people who've, they're straying away from church or they're not interested in this and that, share some of the stuff that you got, or your creation magazines. Once you read them, share them with people. They're wonderful evangelistic tools. But anyways, have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your